Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Somua S35. As you can almost certainly tell, this is a Tamiya kit in 35th scale. If you'd like to see the sprues and other bits that come in the box, I made a what's in the box video, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's a link in the description, so feel free to go and check that out. Let's begin. The first thing to do is install this axle doodad for the drive sprocket. It goes into this final drive housing bit, and then this part goes over top of it. This is keyed, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get into the right position. Then these, I guess they are little caps, they make the opening here smaller. With that, the whole sides are ready to be glued onto the whole tub part. The parts are keyed nicely, so it's pretty hard to make a mistake, unless you really want to. Though even if you're not making a mistake, you may need to apply a bit of pressure. This is followed by the hull front, which more or less drops right into place. At the other end of the hull, aka the rear, some holes need to be drilled, and somehow I noticed that before getting too far ahead and making it impossible to drill from the inside. Look at me paying attention to the instructions properly. Get ready for some filthy polycap action. The polycap goes into this part of the drive sprocket for the usual reason, which is to hold the wheel on its axle without the use of glue. The other half of the sprocket is glued into place like so. That's a good sprocket. So good, I made two. Also, that is the number we need. The bogies come next, and these aren't overly complicated to make. The outer part, which has the axles, and the central part with the leaf springs, are glued together like so. The wheels go onto the axles of this assembly, and then, after you've finished playing with them, the inner part of the assembly, which contacts the hull, is installed here. If you want to be careful, you could glue this together in such a way that the wheels will be free rolling. I didn't see a need for that, so my wheels will rotate no more. The front and rear bogies are different, though the only real difference between them is the middle part with that piece of doodadery above one end of the leaf spring. Still, they are different. And for these ones, it's two different parts, unlike the other central spring part, so pay attention to the instructions to avoid getting anything backwards. Because there just aren't enough wheels on the bogies, you need to make this assembly to hold one more. There is a different assembly with differently numbered parts for either side, but if you don't mix them up, there won't be any problems. Probably. It seemed like a good idea, and the instructions do say to do it, so installing the bogies onto the hull comes next, and this is made quite easy by the keying, though it is a good idea to make sure that you're putting the bogies in the correct position. The keying will make sure the positioning is correct. It won't stop you from putting the wrong bogie in the wrong place, so don't do that. The one with the little doodad above the leaf spring should go toward the idler wheel end, in both regards, the bogie itself and the end of the bogie where the doodad is. You can probably tell, and are quite shocked, that I've done this wrong. In all honesty, it doesn't really matter. It is going to be covered. But rest assured, the French tank running gear accuracy police have already given me a stern talking to, and the bruises are healing quite well. Once you are sure you are not repeating Herbert's mistakes, glue the single road wheel assembly into place here. This is also keyed, so it should be almost impossible to put this on wrong, unless you do it on purpose. Might as well then put the drive sprocket into place. You can see how the polycaps give this the friction it needs to stay in place, yet still allow the part to be moved. I follow that by gluing this, whatever you might call it, into place. I assume this is incredibly important. The idler wheel is also somewhat important to the proper operation of the S35's running gear, and it goes together nice and easy. Thanks, keying. Getting that onto the hull was a little bit fiddly, mostly because you have to get this, I'm assuming it's a track tension adjustment mechanism. Whatever it is, you have to get it to sit on either side of the idler. It does also seem to have a correct way around it should go. This side plate goes on next, and there are quite a few points of keying for this. If you've built the model correctly enough, you shouldn't have any trouble getting this into place. Even old Herbert did it right. Time for a little bit more filthy polycap action. This time, they're inserted into these cup-like things, which are subsequently glued onto the hull here. These will help hold the upper hull in place. I've never seen a hull held in place with polycaps before, but there's a first time for everything. Now it's time to add the side, well, they're not side skirts, side plates, running gear hiding covers. Whatever you might like to call them, they're not difficult to install. unless you insist on putting them upside down or something like that. And you can see they cover pretty much all of the running gear, including my little mistake. So now we can pretend I didn't make a mistake. After my mental gymnastics, I put the return rollers together. These are a simple two-part assembly, and while they bond, I install these, whatever they are. I assume these are skids for the tracks, to stop them from dropping down too low. There is a fair bit of space between those return rollers, or there would be if they'd been installed. That's what I'm doing here, installing the return rollers. It's very easy. Now you can see there is a fair bit of space there. Brackets for shackles go on next. These ones are at the front of the hull. At the moment I'm only installing the brackets. The shackles can be added later. I then turn my attention to the rear of the hull where I drilled those holes. If you haven't drilled the holes, now is the time. You need the holes to mount this whatever it is, and this, which I'm assuming is a number plate, and it goes above the whatever it is. Above that, I install one of the clear parts, which I believe is some kind of tail light. This is just going to be painted over, so the clear plastic is a bit redundant, but that's what the part is made from, so that's what we're using. Another clear part, which will also get painted over, is this, I assume it's a convoy light. Obviously, not being an S35 surgeon, I don't know for sure. I do know that the part is very easy to get into place though. I then add the brackets on the rear. These are the same as those on the front, so you could do them all at the same time if you wanted, but I was following the instructions, like a good boy. Oh my, look at the clock. It's time for tracks. This kit has individual links, which is a little bit unusual for a Tamiya kit, but I'm not complaining. They are kind of small, which does make them fiddly to put together. It is, in theory, very simple. You just press them together, and as long as they are around the right way, they'll snap together. I think if they were just a little bit bigger and there was more area to grip, this would have been a bit easier. It's not really hard, per se. It is quite time-consuming, though. The way I did this was to assemble the tracks into sections of 10 links. It just makes it a bit easier to count them. You need 102 links for each side, and there were plenty of extras, which is good, because I did have a few that refused to clip into each other. Putting the tracks onto the tank isn't the hardest thing in the world, though I will say, joining the ends of the run together was a bit tricky. I didn't actually film it because sometimes my brain doesn't work, but you can see that I did actually get the tracks onto the model. Either that or I've got some nice fairies that did it for me. The 102 links per side thing should be taken with a grain of salt. I did have to add or remove at least one link, maybe add and remove. It has been a while since I built this, so I can't really remember exactly. It's not really a big deal though, unless you're a rivet counter and you need the exact right number of track links. I'm not, so I don't really care, and I say use however many links you need to make the tracks complete and reasonable looking. I think these look rather good. Time consuming for sure, but I feel like it was worth it, certainly much better than rubber band tracks would look. The upper hull needs a couple of holes drilled into it, and if you don't do it now, or at least before joining the upper and lower hull together, you'll probably regret it. The instructions do specify a size of drill bit to use, but I don't worry about that. You can always widen the hole with your knife later on. As long as the initial hole is there, you'll be fine. To enable the joining of the upper and lower hulls, we need to install this clip thing. It's not really a clip. Whatever, I would suggest doing this a good while before you intend to join the two halves, so it has time to bond properly. While we're looking at the inside of the hull, why not install these vision hatches? These need to be installed from the inside, and they have some generously sized tabs to hold them in place. Easy. There's a clear piece for the vision device on the inside of the driver's hatch, which, again, will probably just be painted over. Then that hatch gets mounted here, and again, there's a good tab to hold it in place. It seems like you can only model this open unless you want to do a bit of plastic surgery to make it fit in the closed position. I chose to go with the default open hatch. Eventually it'll be dark in there, so you won't be able to see there's no interior, so this is fine. This side hatch can be modeled open too, if you wish. There's no interior, so you'd simply see a big open space inside, so I just plop the hatch into place. If you do want to model it open, there are some additional hinge parts, but obviously because mine is closed, they aren't needed. This thing has quite a few external hatches, and they're all installed in pretty much the same way. I position them and then add glue from the inside. On the front of the hull, I add this little Somua plate. You don't see many tanks with their manufacturer's name or logo on them. which doesn't really bother me, but I do think this is an interesting touch. There's one for the rear too. Also on the rear, I add this thing. There was one on the front too, and I didn't know what that one was either. Next, I add the two big grills on the engine deck. These are simple enough, just make sure you're putting the correct part on the correct side, or else. The time has come for the joining of the upper and lower hull. How exciting. You can see how the little latch thing, for lack of better words, links into the front of the lower hull, and then the polycaps hold it in place. At the front right of the hull, I install this headlamp, or lampe frontale, as the kids say in French. It's not quite as good as Scheinwerfer, is it? There is also a clear lens for this, but I've not added it. That way, if this does get painted, it won't get painted over and will remain nice and clear. On the left here, I add this horn, klaxon, or whatever it might be called. I've no idea what this really sounds like, but I choose to believe it's one that goes awooga, because that makes me happy. Above the large hatch on the left side, I add this bar, which I assume is to assist in quickly getting through said hatch. Then we have a couple of brush guards. For brush guards, these are pretty hefty. There's one for the klaxon and one for the headlamp. These should be very well protected from the evil brush. I add shackles to the front of the hull next. These pretty much clip into place and should stay there with friction. You could just leave them there to dangle, but to avoid the wrath of the glue god, I glued mine into place. The shackles for the rear are the same parts, but there's a little bit more involved there, so I'll do that later. On the sides of the running gear hiding plates, I add this little duver. I assume on the left-hand side, this probably aids in getting in and out through that hatch. On the right side, I guess it's just for climbing up a bit. I follow that with some lifting hooks, or what I'm assuming are lifting hooks.
Oh, you sure do a lot of assuming around here.
What do I look like? An S35ologist? These are small, so a little bit fiddly to place. You might consider using tweezers. On the right side of the hull here, I install another bar. This one isn't to help with a hatch, maybe it's so people can hang off of it, or maybe they're for hanging stowage, or maybe they're just to look cool. There's a shorter one of these just behind the longer one. Both might need a bit of nudging, but they're fairly easy to position. The exact same things can be said about this lower pair of bars, but I won't be repeating myself. They are fairly easy to position. I thought it might be fun to assemble some stowage boxes next. The instructions gave me the idea. These are pretty simple, you just glue the top on. There are 3 of the slightly wider ones, and a single thinner one. There are mounting holes for the thinner one, these were drilled by me, and I had to make them much larger than the holes I drilled were. The guide pins are thick. The other 3 boxes don't have any guide pins, and thus no mounting holes were drilled. You've just got to sort of balance them on the lower railing, and kajigger them against each other so they look neat. I think they look pretty good, though if you look closely at the top, you can see the backs of the stowage boxes are open, and there is a bit of a hole there. So my solution is to just not look too hard there. Easy. Then here, above the more narrow box, I add a set of tools. There's a sort of rack for the axe, pickaxe head, and whatever that other thing is, and other than some tweezering and a bit of nudging, they go into place quite easily. There's a handle and a shovel that don't really seem to have an exact position, so I just kind of drop them into place where it looks like the instructions want them. Here's part of the exhaust system. I assume these are mufflers, though they could just be some kind of odd ribbed exhaust pipes. Whatever the case, the little end parts go here, on the ends. They should both be facing the same way, which, when on the hull, will be to the tank's left. Before installing that, I scrape the bolt detail off the top of these 2 bolty doodads here. Not just because I have a problem with bolts. The instructions say they need to be removed in order for this platey thing to sit on top of them. Before installing the exhaust, we need this brackety thing. Then the exhaust goes over the top of it like so. Nice and easy. On the sides toward the rear of the grills, there's a couple of little lifting hooks, presumably for lifting the grills up with a crane or something like that. They do look to be quite heavy. As with the previous parts like this, their smallness increases their fiddliness. Tweezers do help, though, of course, you still have to be careful. Well, I mean, you don't have to be careful, but it is a good idea. Joining the towing hitch to its mount is next, and there's a choice to be made here. Either the simple version, which I've made, or the one with more parts. The simple one is for 2 of the marking options, the Dragoon tanks, and the other one is obviously for the 3rd marking option. This is the only difference between any of those paint schemes. Why not install that tow hitch now? It's probably worth making sure that it's up the right way with the opening facing upward. Otherwise, you'll have trouble with the chains later on. You don't want that, do you? This kit comes with one piece of stowage, unless you include the boxes on the side, I guess. The stowage I'm talking about, though, is this rolled up tarp, or I'm guessing it's a tarp anyway. It's made up of 3 parts that go together nice and easily. The joints being along the straps help hide any gaps, which is always nice. The tarp is then glued over the top of the whatever it is. It's probably not a tarp holder, but the tarp does seem to be shaped to sit neatly on top of this. And now, the chain. I start by cutting this link, being careful not to break it. You just want to be able to pry it apart enough to get some of the actual chain to link with it, which in this video might seem like quite a simple thing, and it is a simple concept. The reality is that I spent quite a lot of time trying to get these bits of chain to connect with this plastic link, and you have to do it twice because there are 2 bits of chain. The instructions say they need to be lengths of 60mm. The kit comes with more than that, so there will be some left over. You could add that somewhere else on the tank. I added some glue to the plastic link once I'd got both chains attached to it. I didn't want any chance of it coming apart. I would really prefer not to repeat that step. This antenna mount is made up of 2 parts, and they go together nice and easy. You may need to give them a bit of a nudge, but nothing too severe. The hole for mounting this was a bit too small, so I'm embiggening it with my perfectly cromulent knife. Then it can be installed. That makes sense when you think about it. Even though the seam where this part is joined together is quite hard to see, I was still careful to position it so that the seam would be even harder to see. At the front, I install this covered light. The cover is very long and a little bit silly looking. I then add even more of these tiny lifting doovers, one on either side at the front of the hull. They are small, and tweezers are your friend. Let's get back to the chain. We need to link these hooks onto the ends of the chains, the opposite end to the one with the plastic link from before. Because of the way these parts are shaped, this is much easier than the link was. Here's why we need the opening of the tow hook to be facing upward. The center plastic link hooks into that. Then, the chain goes through the middle of the shackles. This is why I didn't install them earlier. It would be quite a bit harder to do this with the shackles already glued into place. The hook at the end of the chain then gets, well, hooked back onto the center plastic link. Because there isn't really anything to stop the chain from sliding through the shackle, it can be a bit of a challenge to get the lengths of chain to be somewhat equal, but eventually I got a result I was somewhat happy with. I think this adds a lot to the model. It looks much better than if it were a plastic part, plus it can swing in the wind. Who doesn't want that? That's the final detail for the hull. Now it's time for turret time. First, this commander's cupola goes together like so. This is only really for him to look out of, it doesn't open. On the left side, I install this little hatch, which I assume is for the commander to stick his arm out of in order to give the enemy the finger. What else could it be used for? On the front, there's a little cover for the vision holes. It kind of looks like a weird little cartoon character saluting. I was entertained by this thought. There's even more sick, filthy polycap debauchery involved in the gun assembly. It goes on here like so, and then this cup bit, the bit that holds the gun into the mantlet, goes on like this. Next to that goes the main gun. You can see it's got some keying, so it does stay linked with this, and the elevation can be moved up or down. The polycap within should prevent it from flopping down. We need somewhere to put the gun, so the rest of the turret does need to be put together. Here we have some vision hatches. Like the ones in the hull, these need to be installed from the inside. Easy as pie, though significantly less delicious. I test fit the gun mantlet just to make sure that I'm not making any mistakes. Any more mistakes. Then the turret bottom part goes on. There is a couple of gaps, but these are mostly a result of where I was just a little bit excited to remove nubbins. Things like that are pretty easy to fix with putty, so while best avoided, it's not the worst problem in the world. I then slide the mantlet over the guns, the inner mantlet. That's what this is. You can see the contact points where the gun holding assembly contacts the mantlet. That gets glued nice and solidly together. If you're careful, you should be able to glue this so the gun moves up and down, with the polycap holding it. Personally, I don't feel a need for that, so after making sure the elevation is where I want it, I add glue to any parts that could possibly move. While that's bonding, I install the commander's cupola. This has its own little locking tab mechanism, so if you wish, you can leave it unglued, and it probably won't fall off. Because there just hasn't been enough itty bitty parts, I add 3 tiny lifting lugs around the turret. These are a little bit different to those on the hull in that they have a round base, and there are some round, very slight recesses they mount into. I then attach the gun and mantlet assembly to the front of the turret. There's not much to this, just try not to put it on upside down. At the turret rear, there's a hatch. It's a simple part that simply plops into place like so. You can, if you want, model this open, and if you do, there is another part that gets glued on the inside of it. You would sit the figure there, and hopefully, that would hide the big empty space inside. There's a pair of outer mantlets for the front of the turret, and these slide over the guns. There is a little bit more sliding action with the main gun, if that's what you are into. I found all the contact points I could and glued them solidly together. There really isn't all that much to this turret. It's finished now. To join it to the hull, we use the handy-dandy locking tab mechanism and simply twist the turret into place. You can, of course, glue it into place, but sometimes it is fun to be able to rotate the turret, and sometimes it can help when painting. That's the Tamiya Somua S35 French cavalry tank in 35th scale completed. I believe this might be the first S35 I've built. Pretty much every time I build a French tank, I say,
Oh, I should build more French tanks.
and I should. And I have. I do find them quite interesting. The S35 is no exception, and I'm really happy with the way this model has turned out. Happy, but not surprised. It is Tamiya, and at risk of sounding like I'm being paid by Tamiya, they do make very good quality kits. I mean, if you're watching, Tamiya folks, and I'm sure you are, I would accept money to keep saying that I like your models. It wouldn't be a lie. Anyway, it's a nice kit. It goes together with no real problems, though things like the track and chain assemblies, while I do think they are very good and add quite a lot to the kit, they can be a little bit fiddly and mildly annoying. I would say those are very minor complaints. As I keep saying, I'm not an S35ologist. I've no way of knowing if the detailing is 100% historically accurate, but it looks the part to me, and that's all I really need. I'm sure if you wanted some extra details, it probably wouldn't be that hard to find some aftermarket extras, or you could even 3D print some, I would assume. I had fun building this Somua S35, and I'm sure you would too. Unless you don't like building cool model kits, in which case I really don't know what you're doing here, but keep watching. I think I might be entering waffling territory, which is nowhere near as delicious as it might sound, so it's time to go. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you want to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modelling a couple of times a week. There's a link in the description. Subscribe here if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do and you want to see videos a bit early, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links to those are in the description too. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.